The days when I installed NPCs in escape games. Author, green bamboo leaf copy, one of the players is a murderer, find it, or live for 7 days. There is a new player in the infinite world that is rich in snake essence disease. He is Loki and likes to watch silently. Finally, he will give everyone a surprise. Sorry everyone, you are late. Game over. Ren Yifei shook the trophy in his hand and looked apologetic. On the night of the wake-up call, he is the group favorite Fei who eats melons and watches operas. Hidden in a dangerous apartment, he is Song Baji, a harmless and helpless blind young man. The treacherous demon night banquet, he is a powerful and arrogant big demon crane. Bah! If you have the ability to play as an NPC and eat melons, don't take the card if you have the ability. Ren Yifei, I can't fight, I can't find a ghost, you can't. After he came, Infinite World has a new reserved item, find the black rabbit Ren Yifei from the NPC and kill him. NPC, who dares to touch my cub / Bai Yuegwang / senior brother. Player, I was wrong. The two major evils in the Infinite World, Ren Yifei, Black Rabbit, a thousand-faced drama expert, and lie detector Cheng Jingling Guanyu, Saman, at first glance, the attributes are mutually restrained. Player A, don't be complacent, Rabbit, you will die if you encounter a lie detector. Player B, fight. Hurry up. Until that day, Ren Yifei and Saman walked side by side. Thank you everyone, we are together. 1. A thousand-faced play was refined by Ren Yifei / a FIX lie detector machine became a fine attack Lin Guanyu / Saman 2. The protagonist once cleared the big villain system and divided himself into 2 seals, the seal body is a white-haired, reedied evil ghost body. 3. Daily change, the 6th day after V. Content label, infinite flow and cool text search keywords, protagonist, Ren Yifei, a FI, supporting role, Lin Guanyu, Saman, others, horror games, unlimited streaming, one sentence introduction, the life of a playwright purpose, love and dedication, work hard brief review of the work, Ren Yifei inadvertently entered an infinite world. All copies are generated by the obsession of one person. If you find this person, you can end this nightmarish game. Ren Yifei, a former actor, decided to give full play to his strengths, use his acting skills to infiltrate the NPC group, and then slowly find out the obsessive. In the process, he saw the scenery of different civilizations, met NPCs with different emotions, and also met a man with the scent of a candy house. In this process, Ren Yifei, who isolated himself from the world, slowly reconciled with him. Life is reconciled. The world isn't that perfect, but it's not that bad either. This article is cleverly conceived, with novel settings, and each copy is a life. The ghost in the story lingers in the world because of his own obsession, and is also freed by letting go. While helping to solve the mystery, the people in the story are also being tested again and growing slowly. Accept the accident, don't get stuck in the past and pain, maybe you can find new hope. Volume 1, Happy and Mourning. She hugged me when I was leaving. She dragged on the ground and I couldn't leave. Then I had no choice but to give her a hand. On the surveillance screen, the suspect wearing a yellow vest and handcuffs is talking. He raised his right hand, scratched his chin, and his tone was a little nonchalant, as if he was not explaining the crime, but chatting. What? What tool did you use to attack the victim? The young policeman clenched his fists and tried his best to control himself, so he didn't make any drastic actions. He should be so angry, because in front of him is a family of 3 suspects in the massacre. It took them several years to find him. When they found him, he was eating wine at the food stall downstairs where the murder happened. Sensing the policeman's anger, the young man who was sitting crookedly in the chair looked over with a strange smile on his face. Well, it's the folding chair next to it. After speaking, he adjusted his posture a little, straightened his clothes, and continued, damn, that thing is not easy to play, so I just played it and gave it a discount. It's all like that, whether it's dead or alive, I have to find another bench card. With the director's angry roar, the studio was quiet for a moment, and everyone who was grinding their teeth turned around and looked at the camera before they remembered, oh, this is filming. Looking back at the young man in the chair, he nodded and smiled at everyone, no matter how fierce and vicious he was. Although the feeling of heart palpitations was still there, he just didn't feel hateful anymore. The assistant rushed over with a towel blanket. Although there is an air conditioner inside, everyone is still freezing, especially the few leading actors in single clothes. In the cold winter and the 12th lunar month, they have to perform the anxiety of the dog days, and they are all cold for them. After replaying it, the director was very satisfied, and greeted the hero with a smile on his face. Mr. Ren has worked hard, hurry up, bring me a bowl of tea. You're welcome. The protagonist in the towel blanket had a calm expression, his body trembled like a cat in the rain, even if a few warm lamps were facing him, it was still cold. The starring Ren Yifei, a handsome young man, is also an old drama bone who has been in the industry for more than 10 years. He is the acting ceiling of this age group. He has won 2 of the most valuable actor trophies in China, but he doesn't have the hobby of fanning people with his nose. Of course, directors in the circle like him mainly because he is dedicated to his duties and is a desperate saburo. An actor who never worries people, everyone commented on this. I still have a few pieces of warm baby over there. Let's take them and share them. Hey, it's really cold today. After receiving the tea, he said to his assistant. The first few supporting characters gathered together, facing a heater, rubbing their hands and stomping their feet and chatting with breath. When there is a filming, the studio is always so lively in groups of 3 or 5. The supporting actor who just finished the play took off his police cap and touched his forehead. In such a cold day, he was actually covered in white sweat. I really thought he was a murderer just now. Contempt for life, without a king's law, makes people shudder. Otherwise, can someone be an actor? It's a pity, it's just too good looking, and it always delays acting. Why don't you delay it? Teacher Ren has grown up over the past few years, and he is less and less like an honest and loyal protagonist. He has to pick up some perverted, neurotic, and murderer second male protagonists. It's a pity. On the other side, Ren Yifei was already wrapped in a blanket and got into the nanny car. He avoided it carefully so as not to rub off the makeup on his body. He was too white, so he put on a dark base makeup. I'll catch up on sleep, the director will make a few more shots later, and call me then. Ren Yifei lay down and turned off the light sideways. Don't worry, I'll call you later. Well, hard work. As soon as the assistant closed the door, the carriage formed a small private space full of security, from the mattress under him to the smell he was familiar with. Any artist with a full schedule has the stunt of falling asleep anytime, anywhere, and Ren Yifei fell asleep as soon as he touched the bed. He was rolled into a ball, with only a tired face and a hand painted with scar makeup on the blanket. There is a special red rope on the wrist, there is no shadow, and it still glows faintly in the dark. Afei, are you awake? No more sleep. There was a thunderbolt in the peaceful dream. Ren Yifei sat up straight, and the next second, he fell straight from the place where he was sleeping, and fell heavily. His fingers touched the gritty dirt, the wind felt on his skin, and the pain in his tailbone made him feel in a circle. Who called me? What's the situation? There was light flickering in front of him, and the air was filled with the smell of burning incense candles, and the silent sudden change in the environment reminded him of some scenes that he was reluctant to recall. Ren Yifei shook his head, and suddenly, his hand touched something, hard and smooth, like a business card. Before he could think about it, a shadow fell on him, and he raised his head. He was a young man who couldn't see clearly with the light behind his back, probably in his 20s, wearing a costume of the commoner type of the Republic of China. Distress. This costume is quite elegant. Ren Yifei thought about it subconsciously, but also felt that it was wrong. It was not like filming. At this moment, the young man was looking at him with a stunned look in his eyes. Isn't it? You're so timid. He smiled and stretched out his hand, apologetically, and with the stubbornness of the young man who refused to bow his head to apologize. If this is acting, at least it is a golden supporting role. Ren Yifei's lips were dry. He slowly stretched out one hand, the other hand clamped the unknown card in his hand, turned his wrist, and stuffed it into his sleeve without a trace. He stood up, flicked the ashes from his body, and found that the one lying there before was a simple little bed built side by side with two long benches covered with pulp. This place is not made of cement or slate, but rammed earth, and one or two weeds grow in the cracks. Wrong. The season is wrong. It was still winter before going to bed, but now my body is very warm. Not the warmth of the heater, but the moist and vital heat. He was under one roof, in an open place, and the cool wind came, blowing away the heat that is unique to summer. Mosquitoes surround my ears, but I can't see any mosquitoes, and there seems to be a stereo sound of chanting, accompanied by a faint cry. What he smelled was no longer the cold and stillness of the studio. There was the smell of oil and wax after burning candles, the rich incense of incense sticks, and the smoke of some jute paper. What exactly is here? Ren Yifei looked into the distance, his pupils contracted slightly. The brightest place in front was actually a morning hall, with elegiac couplets hanging on both sides, and the white cloth swaying in the wind. In the dark world, the lights here are bright, like the eyes of a black cat reflecting the fire. Wake night? You're a little weird. The young man looked at him, his voice lost its warmth, and so did his smile. He took a step closer, his face cracked like the ground that had lost its moisture, his eyes staring at him without the whites of his eyes, filled with suspicion and inquiry. Ren Yifei restrained his instinct to retreat in his slightly trembling hands. What's weird? You scared me. At this moment, Ren Yifei calmed down instead, and he tried to speak in a familiar and intimate tone. I was stunned when I fell. While rubbing the place where he just fell, he pretended to be calm and frowned at the strange face. What did you call me for? This clay puppet-like person looked up and down, and Ren Yifei was still unhappy. After a few seconds, he smiled, and the split face returned to its original appearance, and it was the same as the young man before. Ale Yang asked me to call you. Ren Yifei knew that the first level was over. He twisted his arm and glared at the person who came. Then you don't need to scare me. I got hurt when I turned around and asked you for medical expenses. The young man couldn't help but pat him on the shoulder. You are squeamish. I really don't know why the elders like you. Yo, this also comes with a personal reminder, but it's like an audition when the directors are casting. Ren Yifei pressed his hand on his arm for a while, and said tentatively, I'm good-looking and attractive. The young man snorted, stared at his face but couldn't say anything to refute, and pushed him angrily. Go, I'll go to sleep first. Ren Yifei touched his face, the face of a teenage youth. Wait a minute, you haven't told me why All Yang is looking for me. I'm looking for you to play cards. The young man lay down on the stool and waved his hands with his back to the morning hall. Or I'll ask you to carry things. Forget it. After a few conversations, I figured out the opening plot and roughly figured out the character to be played. He was a beautiful, pampered, and squeamish teenager with no patch on his clothes. Ren Yifei stamped the young man with a good guy stamp and walked forward. In the front and middle is the hall, and now it is the morning hall. A bamboo shed was temporarily built beside the morning hall. Most of the vigils in the morning hall are relatives and descendants of the deceased, and All Yang may be among them. Ale Yang, what are you looking for? Ren Yifei shouted away before he got close, walking briskly, getting closer to the character given by the message than at the beginning. A young man with 5-to-5 hair in front of the poker table raised his head and waved to him. Fei, give me a ride, and Aja always loses. The young man opposite was unhappy. "Brother Liang, you can't blame me for this, the limelight is not good." The young people around started booing, and it looked like an ordinary wake-up scene. Ren Yifei walked over, and the group of young people turned to look at him. They were all whitewashed faces, with split eyes, and there were some secluded things in the crevices, as if something was looking at his face from the crevices of the eyes, giving people goosebumps all over. Ren Yifei closed his eyes for a second. Too exciting. When he opened it again, these faces overlapped with the mean faces of the most demanding directors in the circle, and the corners of his eyes and brows were all picky. I can't tell which is more terrifying, but it's a familiar taste, and I feel at ease. I'm still stunned right now. When I wake up, I'll kill them all in a while. As he spoke, he squeezed in naturally and stood beside All Yang. The watchmen around him listened, and the boos continued. The others turned their heads when they heard the voice here, only to find that it was just a group of young people playing cards, and then turned their eyes back. "That's fine, if this game doesn't work, we'll replace him," All Yang said while drawing the cards. Ren Yifei took a few glances, thinking that he really couldn't blame the opponent for losing, but blamed himself for stinky hands. What kind of garbage cards are these? Everyone was concentrating on reading the cards. He glanced left and right, carefully crossed half of his body, and formed an angle with the bamboo shed behind him. His fingers quickly pulled out the unknown card just now from his sleeves. Is a rectangular card. It is very similar to the magic cards and game cards sold at the school gate, which are designed to deceive children. The back of the card was black, like a boxy coffin. The front was originally blank. After his fingers brushed it, a line of rose gold text appeared on it briefly. "One of the players is a murderer, find it, or live for 7 days. Identity, player. Role, night watchman. Keywords, happy and morning. 9. I've seen a ghost." Ren Yifei rubbed his back molars. He was such a lucky man, Ren Yifei knew it early on. Others can only meet once or twice in their lifetime, but he can never meet something in the world. Even if he didn't know the cause and effect, Ren Yifei knew that he was definitely in a troublesome incident. He wiped his eyes to wake himself up a bit. He had been filming night scenes for the past 2 days, so his mental state was not good now, so Ren Yifei decided to take care of the current situation. "Cause? I don't know. What should I do? I don't know. As an accidental intruder, the consequences of exposure? I don't know. Asphyxia. Trembling fingers are holding the card, I don't know if I'm angry or hate. In short, things are already like this, anything is unnecessary. The only plan now is to mix in it first. In the case of ensuring your own survival, collect a lot of information, and then decide what to do next." He looked elsewhere. "As soon as I looked up, I saw the elegiac couplet of the morning hall. It said diligent and thrifty housekeeping, husband and son, and hard work." The black and white characters seemed to press out the face of an old woman. He stood at this angle, facing the morning hall diagonally, with his back facing the large yard, so he could see the side of the morning hall clearly. Inside was a black lacquered coffin, and the coffin was lit with everlasting lights. Next to them was a pair of middle-aged people wearing sackcloth and filial piety, who should be the direct descendants of the deceased, that is, children. The middle-aged pair looked like husband and wife, the son and daughter-in-law of the deceased. They were followed by 2 very small children, who were the great-grandchildren of the deceased in terms of age difference. The 2 children knelt on the ground and burned paper, their little faces reddened by the light of the fire. To the left of the morning hall is a group of monks who have invited to keep the spirit. They are all wearing grey monk robes, knocking on wooden fish and chanting sutras, and their voices are buzzing. "Hey!" Ren Yifei glanced at it, and with this one glance, his eyes were fixed, and a shiny golden word hanging above his head attracted his attention, monk. Following this name, it is a young monk who is busy holding a candlestick, or a newly shaved head, and there is no ring scar. He seemed to have knocked over a few candles, and he was sweating nervously. What is that shiny gold thing? Player ID? While thinking about it, there was a banging sound in their ears, and everyone was startled by the sound, and turned their heads to look in unison. There were two young people in the courtyard in front of the morning hall. They both wore filial piety cloths. One of them lay on the ground after eating feces, and the other calmly retracted their outstretched feet. Of course, everyone paid attention to the overturned copper incense burner on the ground, not the foot. How did you drop this? It was too careless. Just after the fall, the tray flew out, and the incense burner on the tray also flew out, and the ground was covered with bamboo sticks left by incense ash and incense sticks. My ancestor, the middle-aged woman who was mourning inside, the daughter-in-law of the deceased, hurried out, looking at the mess, her face turned pale, and she patted her thigh angrily. Let your brothers go to the temple of the earth to deliver the syrup. Why did you knock over the incense burner when you came back? The young man lying on the ground was suffering. He struggled to raise his head and looked at this group of people with bad faces, his body shaking uncontrollably. The people who were tricking the other side also fell into the trap. Mother, Adi has been haunted all day. As soon as the words fell, two golden characters appeared on the head of the young man on the ground, second grandson. These two are probably the grandchildren of the deceased. Looking at this sign, the one on the ground is the second grandson, so the one standing next to him should be the eldest grandson. However, the two seemed to have a grudge, and the eldest grandson deliberately framed the other. So, is the eldest grandson doing this because of previous sibling conflicts, or is it against invaders? Useless thing! The middle-aged woman scolded the young man on the ground, then turned back and shouted, Xiaomei, clean this up. However, no one responded for a long time. The woman was even more angry, and ran inside to find a quail-like girl with black braids and a pale face. You girl, why don't you come back? I gave your mother 3 copper coins a day. The middle-aged woman pointed to the mess on the ground. You cleaned up this. I'll clean up right away. The girl was shivering, but her body was straight and her hands were clenching fists, and she looked like a modern person out of place. After the middle-aged woman gave the order, she turned her head and turned her second grandson on the ground back to the morning hall, slapped her back with a big slap. Go and make a good apology with your grandma. The second grandson cried and shouted that he was dragged away, and his 2 feet dragged out 2 crooked earthworm lines on the ground. Seeing the second grandson being taken away, the eldest grandson became more and more complacent. He followed up with an empty bucket, tapped his toes on the ground, and twisted his crotch, looking inexplicably strange. Could it be a girl in this body? Ren Yifei, who was hiding in the crowd, held his hands. This opening was very unfriendly to newcomers. The things on the ground were quickly cleaned up, and there was no abnormality in the yard. Several incompatible beings were concentrated in the morning hall, and Ren Yifei looked over there. Ale Yang, you play first, I'll take a look inside. After hesitating for a moment, he decided to go inside to find out what's going on, but he wanted to live. If there is a chance in the future, kill it again. Ren Yifei's courage was also strengthened by the previous underworld thing. Under the bamboo shed, Al Yang frowned and read the cards, without turning his head, then be careful not to bump into things, and ask the grandpas if you don't know anything. Ren Yifei looked back at him in amazement. He didn't think that he could feel kindness from him. Where can I? Do I look unreliable? He said as he slipped into the morning hall. The morning hall is very large, so it is not crowded with so many people. There were several elderly people sitting on the right side of it. As soon as they saw Ren Yifei, they kindly waved, "A Fei is here." The old people always prefer this younger generation with sincere eyes, and they are happy to see him. Ren Yifei touched it on tiptoe. An elder took out a handkerchief, and when he opened it, a few pieces of bean cake appeared. Here, hold it, why are you losing weight again? Did you not eat well? He asked again, today you are not going to play cards, what are you doing here? Come and burn some paper. Ren Yifei, like a favored and well-behaved junior, took the bean cake in one hand and answered obediently. The old man sighed and patted his head with his dry palm. Your mother-in-law Hunzi didn't give away the candy she caught over the new year. Go, get some copper money paper from your aunt and talk to your mother-in-law. It was too sudden. Already. Su Shi thought of himself, and the old man's face showed sadness. Ren Yifei nodded, took the snacks and walked to the place where the copper money paper was burned. Copper money paper is a kind of rough jute paper with round copper money stamps printed on it, which is burnt to the dead. There are also some paper tie houses, cattle and sheep, sedan chairs, etc. on the other side. The two young people just now and the two children before were kneeling beside the copper basin where the paper was burned. The two children called the eldest grandson father, and the eldest grandson's face was wooden. The 3 generations of this family knelt in such a neat manner. An old mourning hall, all strangers, there is a coffin next to it, and there is a dead person inside. Some things really can't be thought about carefully, the more you think about it, the more terrifying you become, scaring yourself. Ren Yifei is okay, how many times he's dead, and now he's acting like a play again, so he's not particularly afraid. Others don't have that quality. The second grandson with gold floating above his head tried his best to keep calm, but he was still very scared and occasionally raised his eyes subconsciously. This shows that he used to wear glasses and has the habit of lifting them when he is nervous. His eyes wandered, trembling, and the hand holding the yellow paper was shaking. He failed to connect the fire a few times, and almost threw the stack of copper money paper in his hand. Burning paper must be sincere, and if you are disrespectful, bad things will happen. The middle-aged woman turned her head, and Mumu's eyes looked straight at him. Those were not the eyes of a living person, but a sketch that erased all shadows, the lines floated on the face, and the eyeballs looked like worm-eaten holes. Ah! The second grandson sat down on the ground. His movement attracted other people around him, and they all looked straight at him, with thin eyebrows on the white face, without any expression. But farther away, such as young people playing cards and monks, it seems that they don't feel it at all. Playing cards and chanting scriptures continue to exist vividly. The second grandson shivered, his breathing was short, and his voice was a trembling cry. Save me! No matter his expression or movement, all his body language was calling for help, but the eldest grandson beside him lowered his head and smiled. All this fell into Ren Yifei's eyes. Auntie, I want to burn some paper for my mother-in-law. Ren Yifei came over and interrupted the sudden and strange atmosphere. He looked at Mumu's face with smiling eyes, and his tone showed his closeness to his elders, without any flaws. The middle-aged woman in front of the coffin turned her head, and she took Ren Yifei some papers. Good boy, talk to your mother-in-law well. Ren Yifei took the paper, and he noticed that there were several scratches on the back of the middle-aged woman's hand, which had just scabbed over. She said to a child again, Xiao Wan, you step aside. Make room for your uncle Ah Fei. The little girl backed away a little, letting out half of the futon. Ren Yifei's eyes drifted over to the second grandson, then knelt on the futon and started burning paper money one by one. Ah! Ah! Woo! Because of this NPC clearance, the atmosphere eased and the tight strings loosened. Tisk! The eldest grandson glanced at the NPC who did bad things to him, and then looked at the second grandson. You are lucky. The second grandson trembled even more, hugging his knees, biting his fists, and locking the cry and fear inside, only making intermittent gasps. The place where the paper was burned was right next to the coffin, and when it was close, the faint sour odor drifted over. How long does it take for a corpse to start smelling? While thinking about this question, Ren Yifei threw jute paper into the copper basin with a sad face. There are also 2 children who are as silent as him. All of these NPCs, old and young, have all their acting skills online. If they have the same acting skills in filming, how much film can be saved? Ren Yifei pulled Piaowen's thoughts back and continued to observe these people. The eldest grandson looked absent-minded, the middle-aged couple in sackcloth and filial piety knelt in front of the coffin, and the crying mother left too suddenly to give them a chance to perform filial piety. Well, what smells so bad? A sudden voice sounded in the morning hall. Ren Yifei raised his eyelids and saw a young woman with a big belly, a colorful rope on her waist, and a small white flower on her head. She covered her mouth, first stunned, then extremely annoyed. However, it was too late, a golden sign had already appeared on her head. The eldest granddaughter-in-law. Oh, the eldest grandson, his cheap daughter-in-law, also came. This young woman was holding her stomach, her posture was jerky and unnatural, and her whole body was written incoherently. Ren Yifei didn't have such awkwardness pretending to be a pregnant woman. This is the fifth play he has seen. The first few are the monk, the second grandson, the eldest grandson and Xiaomei. Compared with the big moves of the monk and the second grandson, the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law only said one sentence, and there was no NPC to speak after that, and the golden handwriting appeared. What did she do? She said it stinks. Of course the front of the coffin stinks. It's not an ice coffin on such a hot day, so how come there is no smell at all? However, because it is a mourning hall, it is considered disrespectful to the deceased to say stink, so. Disrespectful? In the sea of information, Ren Yifei caught the fish that flashed by. A monk who does not recite the scriptures, knocks over the candlestick and looks around, does not do the right thing, is disrespectful to the deceased. The second grandson went to the temple of the earth to deliver the water, and when he came back, he overturned the incense burner, which was disrespectful to the deceased. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law covered her nose in front of the mourning hall and said that she stinks, which is disrespectful to the deceased. Ren Yifei was thinking before, there are so many people in the show, why do those few have golden characters? Thinking about it at this moment, perhaps the key to the exposure is not abnormal behavior, but disrespect for the dead. Of course, there is also a risk of abnormal behavior. The middle-aged woman has already stood up, and she is not satisfied with the performance of this daughter-in-law. Come here with me. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law gritted her teeth, her expression full of impatience and regret, but she had to go. Ren Yifei glanced at it and continued to throw down the paper money. The daughter-in-law of the eldest grandson, like the eldest grandson, was more numb from routine than fear. Is an experienced player. Over there, the monk and the second grandson seemed to have discovered a new continent, and they stared at the golden words carefully. The eldest grandson who burned the paper looked at the grandson-in-law player with his eyes, like a vulture staring at carrion. His eyes rolled, not knowing what he was thinking. Newbies and old fritters are so distinct. After burning the paper and bowing according to the rules, Ren Yifei exited the morning hall. From the beginning to the end, Chang Sun and the others did not give any attention to this NPC. A very ordinary deceased junior, with a sense of simplicity unique to people of this era, like other night watchmen, nothing special. The preliminary exploration of the morning hall has been completed, and the outsiders have been looked at nearby, and the task has been overfulfilled. The poker game on the card table has been changed. All Yang sat on a bench eating melon seeds, and when he saw Ren Yifei coming out, he called him, "A Fei here." Ren Yifei already knew that this All Yang and some older people were very friendly to him. In many games, NPCs will generate clues when their favorability is high. I don't know if it's the same here. He walked over and sat down on the other side of the bench. Burned paper for mother-in-law. A Liang handed him the melon seed plate. Ren Yifei took a handful of pumpkin seeds and slowly nibbled them in his hand. It's burnt, why don't you go? Forget it, I'm a left-handed person, and I turned my head around and made my mother-in-law angry. Ren Yifei peeled off the flesh of the melon seeds and sighed unintentionally, why so suddenly? A Liang paused, hesitated, and finally just shook his head. I'm getting old. The two chatted non-stop at the poker table, and the summer night wind slowly blew past, dispelling the dizzying smell of oil and wax wafting out of the morning hall. If this is not a morning hall, it is a good place to enjoy the shade. The moon in the sky is big and bright, and the yard is bright. They heard the call of an owl, and All Yang spat out the shell of the melon seeds, and looked around and couldn't find any obvious trace of the owl. Old Xiao is calling again. During this time, the poker table was changed again. A Liang took a closer look and said strangely, "Why didn't I see a song go off today? Isn't this kid just relying on the poker table and not leaving?" Ren Yifei's heart moved. "A song? Where is it? You didn't see it?" Applejack sighed. There were two people next to Aja, but Ren Yifei could tell at a glance which one was A Song. Everyone else was looking at the cards, and they were more focused than the players who were playing cards. There was only a short young man with his eyes fixed on the morning hall with a complicated expression. Ren Yifei followed A Liang's words to test. Did he bring no money today? He didn't bring any money before, and he died. A Liang's words were a bit contemptuous, and he also taught Ren Yifei, "You can't learn from him, you have to gamble, you don't even have a previous job, and you are driven around all day. Auntie is your only son. Oh, listen to you, A Liang, brother Liang, definitely don't learn from him." Hearing this, All Yang felt relieved. He grabbed another handful of melon seeds and gave them to Ren Yifei. "Eat melon seeds." This one, Ren Yifei, was like a duck to water, and he played the away game as a home game, and the few players over there lived like a year. NPCs are very unfriendly to the players who are playing. It is a good treatment to ignore them, and it makes people nervous when they change their faces from time to time. The girl with thick braids, Xiao Mei, was frightened to cry twice, and second grandson had already retreated to the corner, and her mental state was worrying. The eldest grandson was stared at by middle-aged women, and even the calm eldest grandson was reprimanded once. But none of them resisted the NPCs, neither did the old players. Ren Yifei, who was feeling the wrong way to cross the river by the side, knew that provoking an NPC was definitely a wrong act. The consequences are unclear, but there must be some kind of price to pay. He doesn't provoke, and he doesn't stand out. As time passed, the elderly people in the morning hall began to leave, and slowly, only the young night watchman, the family members of the deceased, the monks, and a few helpers were left. After Ren Yifei finished eating the bean cake, he felt his stomach. "I'm still hungry." NPC Aja gave him a look. "Why didn't you faint from hunger?" "I'll have something to eat in a while, I see smoke coming from the kitchen." The older night watchman smiled and played a card. After a while, something to eat came. Because staying up all night hurts the body and is easy to get hungry, the main family cooks miscellaneous grain porridge. The aunt in charge of the kitchen came over with a large porcelain basin. "You all have some food, you can't do it if you don't have the strength to go back." This pot of miscellaneous grain porridge is different from the later generations. There is a layer of water on the top and some beans-like things on the bottom, which are very thin. "We have money to invite a monk, but give us such porridge? No wonder Grandma Hunzi wants." A night watchman couldn't hold back his breath and complained. All Yang knocked on the table. "Don't speak when you eat porridge, I'm worried about choking." "Hey?" It was only when Ren Yifei realized that something was wrong, he turned his head to take a closer look. It's not just about paying a lot of money for a monk, but there is something wrong with the coffin. Farmers of this era, looking at the conditions, bought more thin-skin coffins, and they would not paint them. But the coffin in front of him was covered in black paint, and the coffin was thick. At least it was their family's ration for a month or two. Looking at the lanterns on the four sides, lighting the lanterns is already a luxury, but here they all use good sesame oil. The golden yellow transparent vegetable oil has a luxurious light that should not appear in this kind of home light. Such a funeral is good looking, but it hurts the family, even if it is filial piety to the elderly, this is too much. On the other end, All Yang was still educating the rash young man, what came here was all about love, and he didn't want others' porridge and water, and he gave all the love for the night vigil. The man reacted back, and he walked away holding the bowl in embarrassment. Others also had subtle expressions and avoided the topic, as if to imply that there was a story behind this wake-up call. "Al Yang, give me a spoon." Ren Yifei watched the crowd with his hands in his hands, and his arm was bumped. The person who bumped him stood on the table. "Xiaofei, go and bring Shishi and Xiaoan over. They have been hungry for a day. The child is still young and can't stand this crime." Ah! Ren Yifei was stunned for a moment, unable to remember who this person was. All Yang was spooning the porridge, and when he saw it, he put down the spoon. "A Song, why don't you call A Fei yourself?" Ren Yifei was so moved by the look of protecting the cub, he immediately slipped over, stood behind All Yang, and looked at the porridge sharing scene with round eyes. Aja, who scolded him before, also said, "A Fei has been hungry for a long time." A few young people in the crowd looked at it, and they were puzzled. Are these people blind? In addition to his good looks and sweet mouth, what else is good about this kid? Lazy and hungry. A Song's foot is injured, he is inconvenient. Yes, one high and one low. Several night watchmen who played well with A Song in the past helped A Song. All Yang looked down, as if that was the case. He stopped there, thinking awkwardly about how to end it. Seeing this, Ren Yifei scratched his chin and put the bowl down. "So, All Yang, please help me with more spoons, and I'll call Shishi and Xiaoan." As he spoke, he sideways squeezed out of the group of night watchmen. All Yang didn't stop him. Seeing him drilling into the morning hall, he shook his head and said, "Don't bully Ah Fei all the time. He was just spoiled by his aunt and was squeamish and careless." Bully? A few night watchmen have lost their temper. Let's do it, it hurts to be a real brother, it can't be compared. Only A Song nodded subconsciously, actually agreeing with these words. Xiao Fei. As Ren Yifei walked into the morning hall, he thought about this strange name. Everyone calls A Fei, why does this person call him Xiao Fei? Listening to All Yang's words, he is not that familiar with this Ah Song, so why call him that? So familiar and intimate, it's like a friend. Ren Yifei has many questions. If Ah Song is a player, why does he know that the two children are named Stone and Xiaowan? If Ah Song is not a player, why does he show completely different characteristics? Not even a gambler. This person is even more special than the eldest grandson before, and deserves more attention. A lot of people have gone, and the morning hall is a little brighter. In front of the coffin is the family of the deceased kneeling, the son and daughter-in-law of the deceased in sackcloth and filial piety, the eldest grandson who is silent, the eldest grandson-in-law with a golden letter on his head, the second grandson who is huddled in the corner, and two great-grandson. These two children are both young, and after kneeling for a day, the whole person is dumbfounded. The eldest grandson burned the paper with no expression on his face, and his hands were smelled like jute paper. Suddenly, he saw a young NPC walking slowly, all the way to the coffin, and said to his cheap parents, "Uncle, uncle, uncle. Mom, why don't you two go for a drink? It's okay not to be reminded." Once reminded, the eldest grandson player couldn't help touching his stomach, he was also hungry. "It's Ah Fei." The middle-aged woman recognized the NPC's appearance and lowered her head again. "We're not hungry. Auntie, if you're exhausted from this, she won't feel at ease if you want to come to my mother-in-law." The young NPC called A Fei said with concern. Cough. Zhang soon coughed and looked up at him. "Come on, look at me, I'm hungry." Speaking of the dead, the middle-aged man's body stiffened for a few seconds. The muscles on the middle-aged woman's face trembled, forming a terrified expression. She turned to cover her face and emphasized again, "We're not hungry. Should they go and eat some?" You shouldn't have the strength to look back. The young NPC whispered again, looking at the two children, showing a little unbearable, they are still young. The old woman thought about it for a while, she was distressed for the child, and nodded, come back after eating. Guru. The eldest grandson's stomach made a noise, he looked up at the young NPC, he hesitated, why didn't this NPC call him? As long as he shouted, wouldn't he be able to agree with the situation? Even the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law, who was sitting on the side and rubbing her stomach, looked at him, the bean porridge is not good. If you call me, I will reluctantly drink it. However, this NPC is extremely lacking in eyesight, and their wink is simply thrown to the blind. He didn't ask anything, and left with the two children. So a few big living people, are they invisible or what? Is the treatment of players too low? As soon as the person left, the middle-aged woman lost her face immediately, and showed a bitter and mean face to the remaining people, continue to kneel and make your grandma happy. Hungry players. Ren Yifei took the two children out of the morning hall. A bowl has been placed on the table, and porridge is poured into the bowl. Just as Ren Yifei led the two children to sit down, 3 bowls of porridge were pushed over. There was not much soup in it, and the beans were spiky. He looked up and saw that it was a song. A song smiled at Ren Yifei, and then greeted the two children to eat porridge. Ren Yifei looked at other people's bowls, they were all water, crystal clear. The night watchman returned a resentful look, don't look at it, it's all in your bowl. Cough. He rubbed his nose and sat down to eat with a cheeky face. The multi-grain porridge without any seasonings tasted just average. Ren Yifei drank it slowly. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw the middle-aged woman over there hurrying and letting the two children pass by. She looked a little flustered, and her eyes frequently looked in the direction of the morning hall, while urging the two children, burn some money for the great-grandma, the great-grandma likes you the most. Ren Yifei poked the beans, I just took a few bites, so are you in a hurry? A Song, who was beside him, waited for the two children to leave, then poured their porridge together and ate them naturally. Ren Yifei put down his chopsticks, and he seemed to remember something in his mind. Afei, do you want to eat? If you don't eat the rest, I'll eat it for you. Applejack, who had finished his portion, patted his shoulder. This shot took Ren Yifei's previous bizarre thoughts to an unknown location. Thinking beautifully, he picked up the bowl and drank the rest. There is something in the stomach, and the young boys have the spirit of playing cards again. There aren't a few times a year when they can play poker with integrity. Except for a coffin on the side, in fact, the wake is not at all terrifying as imagined. Probably because it was an elder who died, and an elder who was very kind in the past. When I think about it, they all looked like gentle and loving ones before they were alive, so they are not afraid. Lying in the coffin is nothing but a useless body left behind. What's so scary about the body? Not to mention so many people there. The sound of playing cards continued until the night fell, and Ren Yifei stood up and said that he was going to the thatched hut. The few people playing cards didn't turn their heads, go, don't fall into the pit. Fuck you, I can't drop anyone who falls into the pit. In the country houses of this era, the thatched huts were all in the backyard, so he ran to the backyard. As expected, the thatched hut was in the backyard, opposite the firewood shed. As soon as he entered the backyard, he could smell the thatched hut. The yard is not small, with banana trees and pomegranates planted in the corners, a pig and a few chickens, and an abandoned well, which looks like the backyard of an ordinary farmhouse. He got into the hut, but did not go to the toilet. Ren Yifei rubbed his face with both hands, like peeling off a piece of human skin. His face no longer had the escape and innocence of Afei, he was a calm man at first glance. It's not Afei, he is Ren Yifei. Doted and protected by his family, he can be so innocent and self-willed, like a pampered cat, which is very pleasing no matter how you look at it. But that's not him. Ren Yifei had a faint look of tiredness on his brows, his hands resting on the bamboo shed. He slowly exhaled, and even stretched out his hand to tug at the collar. Only then did he feel that his breathing was a little easier. This is the longest play he has ever played. During the half-day, there was no idle time in his mouth, either talking or eating. But Ren Yifei doesn't really like to talk. It's not his nature, but the influence of the environment. Over time, it becomes part of his personality. There are few secrets in this industry. What you complain about, show off, or talk about drunkenly today will become public property the next day, appearing in the mouths of others and appearing on the internet, making people criticize them and find them over and over again. Vulnerability. So he doesn't like to talk, and he doesn't like to flatten himself and show it to others. He took out the card and stroked it with his fingertips, and the rose gold words glowed in the dark. One of the players is a murderer, find it, or live for 7 days. Ren Yifei boldly assumed that the player who suddenly appeared in the crowd was the player, and the identity of the disrespectful deceased would be exposed. There is a ghost hidden among the players, and the existence of the ghost may threaten their survival for 7 days. To find the ghost and live for 7 days, it uses an or, that is to say, a condition is met. According to the process of the game, or this is the basic clearance conditions. So as long as you perform successfully for 7 days, you can live. But will things go so well? Who's inside? I'm so anxious. Hurry up, hurry up. Someone came from outside the hut and stomped outside the door. Ren Yifei came back to his senses, and he put down his hands. When the time comes, the next play begins. A slightly skinny smile slowly appeared on his mouth, and the corners of his mouth were adjusted again, and the Yifei character design was more attached, followed by the eyes, then the eyebrows, and the stance should be more serious. Layer by layer, a mask was formed to cover his face. Hurry up! The people outside shouted. On the blank mask, the eyebrows and eyes were drawn stroke by stroke, turning into the face of Yifei. His tone also changed slightly, becoming more lively. It will be fine right away, don't rush, urge, urge. When Ren Yifei returned to the front yard, 3 were missing at the card table, so he pulled him in. Wait until the young master kills you all. He rolled up his sleeves. They played till the hour. The watchman walked past the door, knocking on the clapper, and in the quiet night came his hoarse voice and the crisp sound of knocking on the bamboo tube. At the 3rd watch of the child's time, everything is safe and sound. The dark clouds gathered, covering the moon at once, the wind stopped, the sound of chanting stopped, the hoarse cry stopped, and even the voice of the night watchman stopped. Ren Yifei was holding the card in his hand, and his face was full of excitement. He was about to throw him all, but for a moment, everyone on the opposite side froze, and his eyes didn't blink, which scared him to a sudden stop. Caught on? Someone stuck a bug? For a moment, his thoughts flew, and his body froze there, motionless. He stared at him at first, but later felt it was inappropriate, and slowly relaxed his muscles, quietly closed his eyes, narrowed only a slit, and wandered left and right. The world has never been so quiet as it is now, only the shoddy candles still beat and crackle. Come out! The eldest grandson, who was kneeling on the ground to burn the paper, threw the remaining pieces of paper money into the copper basin, clapped his hands and stood up. He looked around for a week, his eyes met the players with different expressions, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. I found you already. In a world that was suddenly still, players were fidgeting, looking weird and dazzling, and couldn't be ignored. The young man named Asong stood up helplessly. He passed the card table and happened to see Yifei. He leaned back against the bamboo shed and faced the morning hall, with his eyes closed, a smug smile on the corner of his mouth, and a card in his hand. Did you get a good card? The other players came out one after another from the corners and walked to the center. Monk was the first to run out, walking so fast that he almost fell. He looked surprised to find his companion, and his voice was anxious and flustered. You guys came here just as inexplicably as I did? Where is this place? What's with this card? In the corner, the second grandson carefully stuck out a head, and the whole person was still a little shocked. There is no golden word on her head, but Xiaomei, who has been scared to cry several times, seems to be relieved when she sees so many people. Hello, everyone, we are companions, right? The old man who had been cleaning the corner put down his broom and walked out slowly. He looked calm, but the movement of holding the broom tightly revealed his true emotions. The eldest grandson looked at the remaining two. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law has a stinky face, still worrying about her mistakes. The young man in charge of fueling the ever-bright lamp is half smiling. These two are obviously old players. You are really unkind. The young man in charge of filling oil looked at the eldest grandson, inducing newcomers to be exposed. If I know that a new person is exposed as soon as they arrive, why should I test the water? Is it my fault? I blame him for his bad life. The eldest grandson player put one hand on his waist, sneered in his mouth, and stretched out his hand to touch his hair. Of course, he couldn't hold on. I almost forgot I was a man now. Only the old players can understand the communication of the old players at the first time, so the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law laughed immediately, and the rest of the people thought it was strange, not like the way they imagined the meeting of the companions. Pit newcomers? This newcomer is. After realizing it, they looked at the monk who was exposed at the beginning, and also looked at the second grandson who was trapped. The second grandson hasn't recovered yet, and this monk is also a newcomer, so he didn't know anything at first. Of course, now he knew there was danger. What exposure? Several old players ignored him and looked at him like a dead man. The rookie player rubbed his arm, as if goosebumps appeared on it. The players' cards were slightly hot at this time, and they hurriedly took out the cards, only to see that the first line above changed. First night, what a man detests is what he detests. The old players are not surprised, the new players are inexplicable, want to ask but dare not ask, hesitant. No. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law found something wrong. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law, the second grandson, Xiaomei, the monk, the person in charge of filling oil, the old man sweeping the floor, and the night watchman Asong. She counted twice. Why are there only 8 people? Where is the 9th player? The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law's eyes swept around, but no matter how many people she counted, she was even more nervous. Of the 9 players, 1 disappeared? Who knows? Maybe it's hidden, maybe it's a ghost. That's what he said. Eldest grandson still watched the crowd for a week, from the monk singing the scriptures to the family members of the spirit watchman to the night watchman outside. There was no difference. Could it be that he hid in which room? Newbie or old player? Ah, the guy who hides in the dark. It must be hidden in a certain room, so you can find it as soon as you look for it. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law used this method to vent the anger of the opening mistake. She turned to look at the monk and the second grandson. With these 2 guys in front of her, she was still safe for the time being. But it's not absolute. No one has ever stipulated that a ghost can only kill 1 person a night. Low-end bureaus have too many restrictions on abilities, skills cannot be used, and there is only 1 item. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law was a little unwilling. The ad oil player laughed. Smart people are familiar with the environment and use it, while stupid people complain about the environment and blame the environment. What did you say? The eldest granddaughter-in-law who was accused of scolding Hawaii by saying was furious. She was in a bad mood already, but now it's over. Did I say anything? Don't take your seat. The 2 of them made a fool of themselves, and then quickly died down. Time is precious and cannot be wasted on this kind of thing. Chang soon pondered the word happy and morning, and suddenly remembered, isn't this the strongest novice game that has not been broken for more than a year? Yeah, it's not easy to deal with. The oil-filled player folded his arms across his chest. This time, you have to be more cautious. Ghosts cannot move out of the body, they can be paired together. This is the fastest way to limit and determine ghosts. Way. It may not be feasible. If the ghost chooses to kill his companions and then kill other people's companions, we still don't know who is. The eldest grandson objected, and finally said with disdain, and I don't think I need to use this kind of inefficiency. Exclusion. Tianyu glanced at the proud eldest grandson, and said, okay, you can do whatever you want. You are also here for the ghost card, right? The eyes of the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law turned between the eldest grandson and Tianyu. There are so many old players in a rookie game, it is beyond the standard. Since they are here for the same purpose, then they will each have their own abilities, how about it? The eldest grandson and Tianyu looked at each other. Okay. Just do what she says. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law is the first to go out, followed by Tianyu and the eldest grandson. Maybe you can pay attention to the ninth person who disappeared. Tianyu said meaningfully, maybe, this is the biggest variable. The eldest grandson pressed his growling stomach, this place is so big, where can it be hidden? The ninth person can't escape my eyes. They walked past the bamboo shed where they played cards and past an NPC holding a card. Isn't this the NPC who refuses to let them eat porridge? The eldest grandson player looked back and sneered, just this card, what's there to be proud of? An NPC. They just left. What do we do? The troubled monk wanted to ask for help, but the old player ignored him. As for other newcomers, it is too late for them to care about themselves, so how can they pay attention to him? The monk, who was regarded as a dead man, could hardly stand, and fell limply on a bench trembling. The newlyweds fell into the fox den like chickens, smelling the fox smell, they were both scared and at a loss. They don't understand what happened, why they are here, what game is this, why are they playing? None of this. Originally seeing the old players, they also gave birth to a sense of belonging to find their companions, and the peace of mind that someone led the team. In this kind of environment, these old players can win their hearts by saying a few good words. But what about now? Not to mention the sense of belonging, I just can't wait to use them as bait and pathfinder stones. The newcomers looked at this eerie and gloomy morning hall, and their sense of security was extremely low. What should I do next? Xiaomei asked nervously. She looked at Asong and the old man sweeping the floor, who were still calm. We can't just sit still. After crying, the girl's stubbornness came out, but instead gave birth to the courage to come back from the Jedi. The monk was silent, the second grandson trembled, Asong did not answer, and the old man shook his head, I don't know either. What will happen to us? Xiaomei asked again. This time, no one answered, only the flame of the ever-bright lamp was beating. Their shadows were grayish-purple, even colder and desolate against the warm yellow light source, just like their hearts. I don't care. I don't care. Any acting, any game, go to hell. The second grandson player jumped up and rushed towards the door, shouting in a hoarse voice, this is all a dream, it's fake, just wake up. With a sudden roar, everyone was startled and watched him run out, even kicking over a stool on the way. Wait! Player Xiaomei wanted to chase after her, but took 2 steps and then stopped. The second grandson has disappeared into the darkness. She looked at the night, it was pitch black, as if it was a little distorted, and it seemed to be facing them with a big mouth. She couldn't help shivering, and a lot of chills appeared in her body. The author has something to say, newbie, uneasy. Fei, hands are sore. The old player went out, and the second grandson went out too. The remaining 4 looked at each other and wanted to say something, but after the old player's encounter, an invisible wall was erected between them. Otherwise, let's go out and have a look. Anyway, it's almost the same wherever you stay. Xiaomei laughed dryly. She took a bald broom from the corner, took a deep breath, and walked out of the morning hall. Then us. The sweeping old man wanted to find some courage. Ash nodded. So, after Xiaomei, Ah Song and the old man sweeping the floor also followed one after another, and only the monk sat there motionless. At least there's still light here and it's safer. The monk comforted himself. He was very scared, and kept his head down. He is an ordinary person, and he has no power to fight against this kind of ghost. He just knows the danger, but what can he do? Why don't you just stay here and leave everything behind for now? The morning hall was silent for a long time, and Ren Yifei's eyes narrowed. Look to the left, look to the right, there is no one. He breathed a sigh of relief, and with his left hand he took out the cards under the table, opened his eyes a little wider, and took a deep breath of incense. Monk? Ren Yifei only felt that his breath was stuck in his throat, and he almost coughed. The monk in the front left is sitting on a bench, holding himself shivering, silent, only the golden letters glow in the sky. Hold on. The monk is bowing his head. He put away the cards, his eyelids moved back at a speed of 0.1 centimeters per second, and his breathing was flat. Isn't it a fixed position? He was also played one after another corpse. In the front yard behind Ren Yifei, as well as the houses on both sides, players entered and exited. They held up lights, pushed and pulled the door, and made a lot of noise. The old players are looking for it purposefully, and the new players follow along, mainly wanting some shelter. Did that player run out of the yard just now? Xiaomei found the second grandson's shoes by the gate. She looked at the door that was not very strong, and felt a little excited. Do you want to go out and have a look? When Tianyu just passed by, he glanced at Xiaomei. If you get out of this door, you will definitely die. I don't know why, this person was obviously not angry, but she felt kindness, so she stepped forward and asked, Brother, may I ask, why did you die? Who is your eldest brother? Tim frowned. Sorry, sir. Xiaomei whispered to please. Tianyu looked at her, was silent for 2 seconds, and asked her, did you see the keyword? Happy and mourning. Yes, since it is a happy funeral, we were brought here by this funeral. Once we step out of the door, out of the scope of mourning, and directly depriving the player of his identity, he will undoubtedly die. Once. Can I just stay where I first appeared? Seeing that he was in a good mood, Xiaomei asked carefully. No, Tianyu shook his head, each game is different, and players need to make their own judgment. Cherish these 2 hours. Time suspension is a benefit only for novice games. Xiaomei still has a lot to ask, but the fuel player has gone far, so he went to the backyard. The old player was right, after a while, everyone's cards were hot, the numbers changed, and 9 jumped to 8. Card hints, 1 player dies, and only of the ghost seal is unlocked. What do you mean? Is it? Xiaomei, who was in a daze in the yard, looked at the cards in her hand, her throat was dry, and she didn't dare to think about it. Never before had death been so close to her. The old player took one look and continued to look for clues, killing a planned newcomer without even letting their eyebrows shake. Compared to this newcomer, they care more about the disappearing 9th person and the ghost. The ghost is hidden in the player, none of them know who that player is, and no one except themselves can believe it. As for the 9th person who disappeared, find it out. Here, the morning hall has been silent, and the monk has not raised his head. Ren Yifei observed for a long time, so he felt a little thief. He sat in front of the card table with a smile on his face, holding the card on the table as petrification with one hand, and the black card under the table with the other hand, and glanced at it quickly. Now there are 2 prompts, what people hate is what ghosts hate, and when the player dies, the ghost unlocks the seal. For the first prompt, Ren Yifei's understanding is, Ghost is very concerned about the player's disrespect to the deceased. Gold letters on the head are the result of being rejected by people, so it is also rejected by ghosts. Who cares if others disrespect the dead? The family of the deceased? Crossed it out, the family looked weird, even a layman like him could see it. Is that the deceased himself? That is, the amiable elder in everyone's mouth, mother-in-law Hun Si? Ren Yifei put a question mark on the name, and then analyzed the players who had already played. A total of 9 players, 8 played, 1 died, and 1 of them was a ghost. The remaining players are, death reservations? Ren Yifei, who regretted his fate, made up his mind again, when the player is so dangerous, I choose to become an NPC. NPC Ren Yifei began to analyze the second item, the death of the player is directly proportional to the strength of the boss. That is to say, the later stage, the more deaths, and the stronger the boss. Oh, the boss is actually a growth type later stage boss. Isn't that bad for players? After all, do players still have basic human rights? Oh, he seems to be an NPC now? That's fine. When the time was about to pass, several old players returned to the morning hall. A certain NPC who secretly relaxed his muscles sat upright in an instant, holding a card, with a smug smile on his face, and the curvature of his face was natural and relaxed. So professional. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law looked at the two. Want to exchange clues? 1 valid clue per person. There is no need to say the real body of the ghost, everyone has already guessed it. After thinking for a few seconds, both Tianyu and Chang Sun nodded. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law immediately raised her hand, and a translucent barrier enveloped them. The wall has ears. I'm the first, said the eldest daughter-in-law, they have 5 laying hens, but there are 8 eggs in the coop that haven't been picked, which is at least 2 days' worth. Eggs are something that farmers value. If they can't take care of chickens because of an accident, then the time of death of the deceased might be 2 days. What happened here 2 days ago? Adding oil has returned to the ever-bright lamp, holding an oiler in his hand to add oil to the lamp, he gave a clue, in the dry well in the backyard, I found a hemp rope just used, with fingernail scratches on it, suspected and related to the deceased. The eldest grandson also gave a clue, I heard the conversation between the deceased's daughter-in-law and the old monk, chanting the scriptures for 7 days, and the descendants kneeling in front of the hall all the time, which can eliminate the grievances of the deceased. These are 3 clues that are not so important but are really effective. At least now they know that the deceased may have been strangled or hanged, and the cause of death was related to something 2 days ago. These clues can help them find the player played by the ghost. More important clues these 3 people will not come up with. They can't even be sure whether there is a ghost among the 3 who got in, so they certainly won't reveal their cards. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law revoked the enchantment. They didn't mention the previous clues, but talked about the 9th person. I've searched everywhere, even the roof. Timothy shook his head, it seems to be invisible. I prefer to believe that it is disguised as an NPC than the claim of being invisible. Zhang soon suspected that the 9th man was hiding nearby, looking at them proudly in the NPC pile. This feeling made the eldest grandson very uncomfortable, and he continued, dungeon is originally the obsession of a ghost, its understanding of the dungeon surpasses that of any player, and it can almost do perfect disguise. The 9th man may be the entry point for this dungeon. Everyone cares about the mysterious disappearance of the 9th person. Unknown means countless possibilities, means they need to do more exclusions, and means more work for them. And veteran players like to have everything in their hands. Even though it's just a facetoffice, and you don't even know the name, you can still get a lot of information. Now a player is missing, and the feeling of being out of control makes them restless. In such a place, with so many people, how did this 9th person disappear? When the 3 were thinking about this question, Ziai Shi passed by quietly, and the world suddenly became noisy again. The young night watchman in front of the poker table slammed the cards in his hand. "I won, come here, give the money to the money. If you don't give it now, you still have to give it back. I will definitely win all the way." It must be the wrong direction of the wind, change positions. The three people on the opposite side were reluctant to throw a few copper plates. Because he was too arrogant after winning, Ren Yifei was pushed aside in the next round, and lay a little pitifully on an empty table, as if he had no bones. Aja, who was passing by, spurned him. Yes. Ren Yifei was motionless, and the seemingly random position was carefully chosen by him, leaning against the wall and blocking it sideways, one hand massaging the other under the table. The arm that had been raised for 2 hours had lost consciousness, similar to the frozen tofu hanging outside in winter. The morning hall is as usual, the cry is still hoarse, the chanting is still buzzing, the spirit of playing cards is the best, only the players are not in a good state. The monk sat alone in the corner and did not speak, and no one asked when the second grandson disappeared. The NPCs didn't react until the other 3 players came back. "Where are you going? I can't find anyone anywhere. Several teapots over there are empty, and things are not being cleaned up." The kitchen aunt scolded the player Xiaomei, her eyebrows stood upright, and she was very unhappy. Xiaomei apologized repeatedly, very humble. She hadn't found out that because of malfeasance, a golden word appeared above her head: "Run errands." As for the other old man, who was also blamed for his dereliction of duty, 2 golden words appeared on his head: "Cleaning." Ah Song was the last to come, he was told by All Yang, and the golden characters Night Watchman appeared on his head. In one night, 1 second grandson died, and 3 more exposed people were added. Ren Yifei wrapped his waistcoat tightly and continued to lie on the table. He felt very tired, not only staying up late, but also mentally exhausted from acting all the time. It seems that the hand is not his own. At that time, being able to control the playing of the cards was already his limit. Sleep for a while, then squint. Ren Yifei relaxed his body and forced himself into emergency charging mode. A scream broke the silence of the morning hall. He bounced off the table suddenly, bloodshot eyes. The author has something to say. "Ah Fei, zzz." The second grandson died. His body hangs in a remote room, with a white cloth hanging from his neck. For the first time, Ren Yifei saw the hanged man. Although the previous underworld system always threw him into a desperate situation to experience life, he rarely had direct contact with the dead, and most of the time he was the one who died. The person who really died violently is completely different from the general teacher at the school, or the special effects makeup on the set. That kind of hideousness can penetrate through the air and make people feel cold from the bottom of their hearts. He looked up. Look at the corpse without wind automatically, spinning in the air. When turning to a certain angle, a pair of blood-red eyes just stared directly at the eyes of Yifei. He felt the corpse laugh at him. The red spread in his sight, and the red liquid that splashed the sky hung down and flowed on the ground. A woman in red appeared in his sight, blood gushing out of her throat, but she was smiling at him. The red blood crawls like a snake, crawling to his feet, locking his body tightly, winding up a little from his ankles, tying him up. Ren Yifei was shivering with cold, and his heart was frozen. The woman looked at him with red lips smiling. "Afei, what's wrong with you?" The voice of the young man shattered his illusion of fear. Ren Yifei turned his head one after another, he stared at Aja Yang and the others, his lips parted, but no sound came out. "Why is your face so white?" The Night's Watch surrounded him, watching him turn pale and sweaty on his forehead. Their enthusiasm dissipated the cold, and Ren Yifei took a breath, feeling that he had died and came back to life. The night watchman took a look at the hanging corpse from Ren Yifei's angle, and then looked at him who was more frightened than a ghost, and understood. "I'm afraid to come and see." The night watchman was helpless, and the people who were afraid consciously hid at the card table to probe, what did Ah Fei come to join in the fun? Come on, 2 people and carry him back. Al Yang found 2 tall and tall night watchmen. Ren Yifei stiffened his neck, no. He reached out and grabbed Al Yang's clothes, holding on tightly, I'm fine, please let me slow down. After 2 minutes, he seemed to relax, his face returned to normal, and he was no longer sweating. Can you do it? Al Yang was still hesitant. Ren Yifei wiped his face, okay. It's okay if it doesn't work. That end has gone so far as to put the body down. People formed a circle, and an experienced old man came up for a rough examination. He found a bruise on the back of his neck, it was strangled. The whole place was silent. My son. The middle-aged woman threw herself on the corpse and cried, but she couldn't see the disgust she had for the second grandson before, while the middle-aged man trembled. The NPCs sighed, and the players crowded into the crowd to watch. This is Grandma Hunzi's house, you said. Even if there is resentment, it shouldn't. The crowd whispered, talking about the secrets that some players don't know. Ren Yifei stuck his head out, the eyes of the corpse had been closed, and it was no scarier than the fake corpse during filming. It was not the first time he had seen a dead person, so he always thought that he was not afraid of this kind of thing, and he could even watch the anatomy video and eat fat intestines. But the dead man's blood-red eyes reminded him of bad memories. When there is no memory interference, Ren Yifei is not afraid of the body left by the dead person at all, and he can think and analyze calmly. The second grandson's corpse had bulging eyes, pale ischemic complexion, blue-purple lips, and blue-purple nails. This is typical of mechanical asphyxiation. Mechanical suffocation death, in layman's terms, is suffocation, strangulation, hanging, and strangulation. The biggest difference between hanging and strangulation is that the force of a rope is mainly concentrated under the mandible, that is, under the neck, and the back of the ear usually does not touch, so the bruises are mostly concentrated on the neck. The other is that the rope goes around the neck, and the force is evenly applied, so the traces can also be seen on the back of the neck. The blood stasis on the neck of the corpse was obvious, so he did look like he was hanged after being strangled to death. Why would the ghost do this? Is there any special meaning to this way of dying? Ren Yifei was still thinking about this question, but the corpse began to become transparent. He quickly glanced around, and no one in the NPC showed any other expressions. Will NPC automatically block this exception? The old players who were in the crowd were calm, and the newcomer covered his mouth, not letting himself call out. The corpse was disappearing, and he even saw the texture of the ground through the corpse. At this time, the middle-aged woman who was crying on it stood up dumbfounded. The middle-aged man turned around and walked back blankly, let's go, don't delay the wake. What? Is this human? However, it was so magical that all the NPCs stood up, turned around and started walking towards the morning hall. Their eyes were dull, not like real people. New players are horrified and terrified. The 3 old players immediately mixed into the team, and the other newcomers also followed. Tianyu stopped Xiaomei, lowered her head, and commanded quickly and in a low voice, after the corpse disappears, there will be a card left behind and bring it to me. Nominations? Xiaomei looked back at the corpse that had not completely disappeared, and nodded with gritted teeth. The other players heard it and looked back, but they were not very interested in that card. Xiaomei endured her fear and stayed beside the corpse for half a minute, and finally waited until the corpse completely disappeared, dropping a black card. The team guarding the spirit over there has also arrived at the entrance of the morning hall. Holding the card, she caught up with her slightly weak legs. Mei squeezed into the night's watch, ready to go through, walk in a straight line, and send the cards to refuel there. She passed without a hitch, and there was a pair of eyes in the night's watch watching him. Ren Yifei wanted to take the opportunity to take that card, but in the end he didn't do anything, he couldn't scare the snake. Xiaomei and Tianyu bumped their heads, and they ducked to talk. The night's watch went back to the poker table, and they continued to play cards and gossip, and there seemed to be nothing else to do on a night like this. The hearts of these young people are magnanimous, unlike players who pretend to have so many things. Although Ren Yifei avoided the NPC team, he was still as worried as the players. The second grandson died, and all traces of him were erased at will, as if it never existed. Is this the death here? Body and memory, not one left? Looking up at the pitch-dark sky, he was determined to go to Grandma Hunzi's room to check, but this was not the right time. It was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. If you hold a candle, the light will attract the attention of others. It seems to have to wait until dawn. Ren Yifei couldn't hold it, and fell asleep on the table. He frowned, his fingers scratched against the table unconsciously, and he slept unsteadily. The night watchman next to him saw it and put a dress on him. Ren Yifei can still take a nap, pity that the other players are hungry and tired, but they are stared at by NPCs, so they can only carry them hard, their eyes are bloodshot, and their stomachs are gurgling. They waited and waited, until the light of day dawned. The players Iome looked up with a plate and looked into the distance. A morning star appeared in the eastern sky. This bad nightclub should be over, right? Summer always brightens earlier. Usually at this time, the breakfast shop has already opened for steaming buns, and there are also noises from people who got up early to go to the market, but there was no movement here. Ren Yifei woke up, yawned and stood up to stretch his muscles. The sky was not yet clear, and we stayed all night. Everyone was in a bad state of mind, and they all yawned with dark circles under their eyes. No amount of strong tea can save their desire to sleep. With the right time and place, this is the perfect time to explore other venues. Thinking it was almost time, he made an excuse to sneak into the backyard. Ren Yifei leaned on his waist and avoided people. He seemed to be walking around the backyard as a thief, walking all the way to the back of the most remote room, and climbed in through the window. This is the house of Hunzi's mother-in-law. The place where the second grandson was hanged was near the door. Bai Lian was hanging on the beam, and the body was swaying. Ren Yifei looked at the beam and remembered those blood-red eyes. Wait a minute, he patted his face, and suddenly remembered something. I just need to stay until the end? It's both infiltration and investigation. Why is he so aggressive? This is not a criminal investigation drama with him as the protagonist. Squeak! A mouse crawled over, startling Ren Yifei. It was not yet fully bright outside, and the sun had not yet appeared, so the room was dim and could only be seen clearly. He rubbed his face. Just, come here. The room has been carefully tidied up, and many things are missing. The bed is not there, the wardrobe and the box are not there, and the house is full of shabby clutter that is not used. If the NPC didn't mention it, Ren Yifei would think that this was a utility room and never lived in it. He looked down, and only traces of dust deposited on the floor proved what had been here. The deceased had just died, and the family hurriedly packed up and turned the old man's room into a utility room. If there is no inside story in this, the ghost will not believe it. In a corner of the room, he found an elderly chair with a sloping back. It was clean, not outdated. The seat surface of the chair is polished and shiny, which is commonly used by the owner. Looking down, there are very fresh scratches on the armrest of the chair. In addition, he also found that there were several messy footprints on the ground, covered with a thin layer of dust, which could not be seen without a closer look. This imprint is not long left, because the lines are very clear. But when the second grandson's body was discovered before, no one came here. Ren Yifei suspects that this is the trace left by the player looking for clues in the third watch last night. It was suggested that the second grandson died very early. If he died here at that time, the players who came here would not have discovered it. So it was after the player checked the room that the second grandson's body appeared here. That is to say, when Ziaishi's ghost returned to the morning hall, it was definitely not the first batch of suspects, and the number of suspects was reduced. The ghost chose to hang his second grandson in this room, is he implying something? Ren Yifei's eyes slowly turned to the beam. If this room has ever been hanged, then there should be 2 wipe marks on the beams. Holding the wooden pillar in the house, he climbed up with difficulty, sticking out his head carefully, and only glanced at it, and his mind was shocked. As a result, his hands and feet loosened, and the bang-dang fell to the ground, shaking off a lot of dust on the beams. Ren Yifei gritted his teeth in pain, pounding his fists on the ground. Although he has worked hard to learn all kinds of small enemy skills, he is still a scumbag in terms of physical fitness. Cough, cough, cough. He fanned the air, then covered his mouth and coughed softly for a while. The half of his body he hit was numb with pain, and it took a few minutes to feel better. This crime was not in vain, and there were 2 regular friction marks on the beam. 2 places, that is to say, in addition to the second grandson, there is another person hanging here. No, maybe not people. If it was a living person, when he was hanged, he would struggle to some extent because of the pain, which led Bai Lian to leave many light scratches on the beam. However, these 2 friction marks are very regular, as if the things hanging up have no instinct to struggle at all. Ren Yifei, who was lying on the ground, raised his head, his eyes widened slightly, as if a black shadow appeared in front of him, quietly wrapped on a white cloth. A pair of women's feet hung in front of him, motionless. The author has something to say, War 5 scum, official stamp. Ah Fei, no, no, you are talking nonsense. Ren Yifei pursed his lips, he already had a basic judgment in his heart, but it just needed to be verified. Just as he was about to get up, he saw a pair of black cloth slippers in the gap under the door. Hun Zi's mother-in-law's shoes? Ren Yifei, who was fighting 5 scumbags, came back holding his waist. He sat down on the stool, ready to wait for dawn. At dawn, he can always go out for a walk, right? Could there be any useful clues? Ren Yifei was full of anticipation. After seeing 2 nights in a row, he wanted to see day. Oh, accompanied by the clear sound of roosters, Ren Yifei rolled his eyes, dawn? The lovable eyes were half-curved and solidified on his face. The entire morning hall was twisted for a moment, as if the TV screen was stuck. When he returned to normal, All Yang in front of him was refreshed, smiled, and said to him, A Fei is coming to watch the night again. Ren Yifei. Again? What again? You look at my panda eyes and say it again? Ren Yifei's whole face was about to be distorted with the morning hall. All Yang didn't notice Ren Yifei's unnaturalness. He said to himself, I'm much more comfortable now after a good night's sleep. Coco, God is sleeping like hell. I used to expect the dawn to be too excited, but now I am disappointed, and the pain of staying up late returns to my body again. He didn't stay up all night, he stayed up for 3 nights. Ren Yifei only felt that a hammer was knocking a nail into his brain, but he still twitched and smiled. I don't know how I spent tonight, and I didn't rest well during the day. Didn't you rest well during the day? A Liang sat down beside Ren Yifei. I said, why are your eyes still red? Ren Yifei rubbed his face, looking bleak as he had been ravaged. A Liang thought for a while, you can move 2 later. No, you can move 3 long benches to build a small bed. Noisy is better than no sleep at all. Xiaomei passed by with the water in her hand. She couldn't help but turn her head and glance at the 2 NPCs with red rabbit-like eyes. She didn't close her eyes all night. Xiaomei also tried to be lazy for a while, but as long as she closed her eyes for more than a minute, an NPC shouted, Xiaomei! 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 Sole reminder, a reminder? But trademark can be a person. The fear was replaced by the pain of insomnia. At a certain moment, Xiaomei wanted to set the morning hall on fire. Come on, die together. Xiaomei, the middle-aged woman, called her. Xiaomei's face turned even darker, she gritted her teeth and replied, come on. Today is still the night of the wake, and everyone drank a bowl of porridge with a lot of water as usual. The players finally couldn't bear it anymore, and they poured in half a bowl of bean water with the NPC spat eyes. I'm still drinking this half bowl and I'm still uneasy, and NPCs are looking for something when they're okay. Ren Yifei was eating bean cake and bean porridge, and was very sympathetic. If they continued to eat and sleep like this, they might not be able to survive the ghost. The player is really pitiful, but fortunately he is an NPC. I'll go to the toilet first. While playing cards, a young man couldn't hold back and hurriedly stood up. When Ren Yifei saw that it was Aja, among so many people, it was reckless to count him talking too much. He rolled his eyes and stood up, yawning to join in the fun. I don't even think if you don't tell me, I suddenly want to go to the toilet. Oh, Brother Fei, aren't you afraid of the dark? Applejack winked at him. Fuck you, who's afraid? A Liang, who was playing cards, raised his head. If you want to go, what nonsense. The two fought all the way to the backyard. I opened the bamboo shed door of the thatched hut, and there was a toilet inside, and when I got close, I smelled the smell of urine. The young man called Aja poured water in it, pattering. Ren Yifei was outside, as if he had nothing to say. I really didn't expect it. What? Aja, when those uncles mentioned Granny Hunzi yesterday, their expressions were wrong. Hey, do you know what's going on? My mother won't let me inquire. Ren Yifei said in an indignant tone, how old do you think I am? Can't let me know about anything? I don't think other people don't know. Cough cough, Aja's breathing became smaller inside. Since Auntie won't let you know, don't make inquiries. Ha, Ren Yifei's voice carried a hint of sarcasm, so you don't know either. Crack. Aja pushed open the door, tying his trousers belt, and shouted anxiously, who said I didn't know? Then tell me. Ren Yifei excited him. I know a little bit, don't say it was me. Applejack looked around, come here. The two pulled to one side of the bush, and the shadow of the tree fell on their dark clothes. When he got here, Aja hesitated again. He shrank his neck and moved towards Ren Yifei. He looked around, maybe a little bit of trouble could startle him. Tell me, who are you, Brother Fei, are you still worried? Hearing this, Rao was frightened. Aja couldn't help but rolled his eyes. I'm really worried. I heard, Applejack lowered her voice, Grandma Hunzi was hanged. Hanged? Sure enough, as he had guessed before. But what about more details? Okay, why? Ren Yifei said halfway through, looking at Aja, leading him to tell more information. I heard it too, I heard it. Aja coughed and continued to lower her voice. That night, a burglar broke into the house. Someone saw a dark figure jumping out of the wall, and the mother-in-law Harazi was scolding badly. No one thought that she would be scolded in the middle of the next night. Gone. Ren Yifei raised his eyebrows and asked in a low voice, did anyone see Granny Hunzi on the day she died after the thief was invaded? Applejack thought for a moment, I don't know about that, and Grandma Hunzi didn't like to go out. Do you want to listen to me? You continue. Ren Yifei said that he was all ears. After Grandma Hunzi died, she opened her mouth, stuck her tongue out, and kept her head up. They said that she had a grudge in her heart. I was afraid that something good was stolen, and the family complained. Aja said while rubbing his shoulders, that's what happened anyway, I don't know anything else. Head up? How can it be head up? Whether hanged or strangled, it will not form a posture of looking up. Unless the deceased keeps his head up after death, it is difficult to straighten the body after it forms a corpse. Ren Yifei looked at the backyard with moonshine, his eyes passed through the material world and reached a place that others could not see. His world turned rapidly. The surrounding old houses, bushes, and courtyard walls were removed one by one, and he appeared in Grandma Hunzi's room again, with the white lian hanging from the high beams. An old lady hangs on it, with her mouth open and her tongue stuck out, her head raised slightly, her eyes are blood red, and there is a glass lens in the middle, which is hollow. He was standing beside the corpse, looking at her. This is the thinking space he has built in his brain, and it belongs to his world. Ren Yifei likes to figure out characters in his own world and conduct simulation drills. In this world, he is the creator and controller of everything. It takes at least 2 days for the stench to develop, but the corpse begins to stink on the first day of the wake. Ren Yifei stretched out his hand and dialed the word death time 1 day forward, that is, the day after the snitch came. There was at least 12 hours difference between the real time of death and the time of fake death. It was impossible for the family of the deceased not to know, but they concealed it and pretended to be hanged. Grandma Hunzi must not have been hanged. After she died, she became a corpse with her head raised up, and she was disguised as hanging. It takes 4 hours for the corpse to start to form, it takes 7 or 8 hours to fully form, and it takes 23 hours for the corpse to begin to ease. Because it is summer, and it is an elderly person, the muscle strength is insufficient, so the time will be advanced. Therefore, the time of camouflage hanging is more than 8 hours and less than 23 hours from the real time of death. And, during this process, the deceased kept his head up until the corpse was stiff. Under what circumstances would the deceased keep their head up until a corpse is formed? Recliner. An old man's reclining chair appeared in the corner, the one in the room of Hunzi's mother-in-law. Ren Yifei walked over, he sat down slowly, leaned back, and lay on it. On the back of the chaise longue there was something raised like a pillow, and it touched his back. Ah Fei is an offspring of about 1.7 meters, but Grandma Hunzi is not that tall. This bulge may just support her neck, and with the back-bending chair, her head can be slightly raised. After she died, she kept this movement for more than 4 hours before forming this corpse. What was her family doing at that time? It is impossible for a family of several people to find her death. Why did they not take the body of the deceased immediately, but chose to ignore it, and finally even concealed and disguised it? Grandma Hunzi, how did she die? There was no blood in Grandma Hunzi's room. When Grandma Hunzi's body was found, there should be no obvious abnormality. From the perspective of thinking inertia, it is most likely to be strangled with the pretense of hanging. He lay motionless on the recliner. A twine stretched out from the darkness, wrapped around his neck and tightened. Ren Yifei struggled desperately, and another black shadow came out, trying to hold his struggling hands and feet. Death scares him, and he struggles instinctively. The old lady's strength is limited, and all she can use is her hands and feet, so he kicks and scratches with his fingers. His fingernails left scratches on the armrest, and even scratched the shadow a few times. That dark shadow. The back of the middle-aged woman's hand appeared in front of him, with obvious scratches on it. It's just crusted, and it looks like it's been scratched in the past 2 days. The shadow raised his head and suddenly had a face. It was the face of the middle-aged woman in the morning hall. Her face turned against the light, less honest and honest, more hideous and terrifying. Then the guy holding him behind his back. Ren Yifei raised his head, and his eyes saw an equally honest but hideous face. The owner of this face is kneeling in front of the coffin at the moment, crying over and over the pain of the child wants to be raised, but the family cannot wait. In his tears, how much is guilt, and how much is remorse? Ren Yifei waved his hand, and the ropes, shadows, and reclining chairs all dispersed. The author has something to say. A Fei, the murderer is you. Motivation? What about the murder weapon? What about the chain of evidence? A Fei, I'll look for it again. This era still pays attention to filial piety, especially when the deceased is such an old man who has enough men to support the portal, which is the most important moment in his life. The family killed her and concealed it. The old man died hastily, leaving many traces. It can be seen that this is indeed intentional murder, but it is not intentional murder with a long-term plan. It must have a sudden incentive. A dishonorable thing has happened to you, and this incident can even destroy your previous diligent housekeeping and hard work. Strangulation can cause blue face, bleeding eyes, occasional tongue sticking, and incontinence. It is a very unseemly method of death. The old man's relatives chose to let her die in such an embarrassing way, and there must be another benefit, which overwhelmed the reverence for his mother and the remaining family affection. Etiquette and law are far greater than the sky. What is disrespectful to the elderly? Is it propriety or law? Ren Yifei didn't think that the death of Hun Zi's mother-in-law was related to the loss of valuable things in the family, so it was not the case. Why did you die? The corpse rolled its eyes, and the grey glazed pupils looked at him, as if to tell him something, but in the end it was just a tear of blood. Aja and Ren Yifei returned to the poker game, where they hadn't even played a game yet. In the cheers of the crowd, Aja came off the stage again. Ren Yifei looked at the morning hall. The ever-bright lantern in front of the coffin is still burning, the white smoke of incense sticks up, the filial sons and worthy grandsons kneel on the ground and burn paper money constantly, and the eminent monks invited at high prices keep chanting sutras. Funerals are so beautifully done that no money is spared. Anyone who sees it has to say, "This is the great dutiful son." Who knew the filth behind it? If the ghost is the dead, is she willing? Ren Yifei suddenly smiled. If she was willing, how could she become a ghost? He originally just wanted the salted fish to lie down, until the end. But at this moment, Ren Yifei just wanted to get to the bottom of things, and all the truth came out. Because he is a fei, a young man favored by the elderly. He doesn't care what the hell, he doesn't care what the copy is. Grandma Hunzi can't die in vain, such an old man who cares for the younger generation, she should not be burdened with humiliation and be swallowed by the etiquette of eating people quietly. The murderer can't accept the praise so openly. Ren Yifei doesn't mind his own business, but A Fei is different. The actors of the experience school will have the sequelae of being too deeply involved in the play. Ren Yifei is especially serious. He will be deeply affected by the character's character, as if he has become this person, his way of thinking and behavior will be affected. At this moment, it was impossible to tell whether he was Ren Yifei or A Fei. As the night got darker, there was always no shortage of people at the card table, and there was always no shortage of babbling crying in the morning hall. Ren Yifei went to borrow 3 stools, lay on them, and looked at the moon in the sky. There were 6 people left, and the 3 old players who came back in the first batch were eliminated, and the rest were Xiaomei, Asong, and Sweeping. Who is the ghost among them? He already has a suspect in his heart, but he just needs to verify it again. Thinking about it, he closed his eyes. As a squeamish young man whose family background is not the best, but the treatment must be the best, A Fei occasionally acts like he can't bear hardships, which will not make people feel wrong, and Ren Yifei will try his best to make himself feel more comfortable. The emergency catch-up sleep of more than 3 hours before was not enough, and he needed sleep. He fell asleep, and the night watchman passed him. "How old are you? You still can't take care of yourself." He put a single coat over him. Player Xiaomei also passed by him, making an envious slobber. At the 3rd watch of the child's time, everything is safe and sound. After some time, a hoarse voice scratched his eardrums. He woke up, but the world was suddenly quiet. The card refreshed a message: "Second night, the secret of ghost was eaten by rat ants, just like its heart." Ren Yifei's eyelashes blew across the water like the wind, trembled slightly and returned to calm. The enemy is in the dark, so am I. It's free time for players. "Sir, can I follow you? Let me do anything." Xiaomei has realized that following the old players can get more clues and have more chances to survive. It seems that adding oil is the most friendly old player to newcomers. Xiaomei's voice trembled slightly. In order to survive, she could put down her dignity and knelt down and pulled him to beg. "Whatever you want." Tian Yu gave her a sideways glance and walked out the door without saying anything or driving away. Before Xiaomei took a risk to get cards for him, she finally got the reward. Xiao Meizhen realized it, she was overjoyed and chased after her. The two went out, and the rest of the cleaning got inspiration. He was about to find the old player, but the eldest grandson and the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law had already left the morning hall one after the other. Obviously they were not going to bring new people. Cleaning looked at the almost autistic monk. He shrank his neck and said to Asong, "Let's act together." Asong smiled, "Okay." Xiaomei followed and added oil. She ran back and forth, holding a candlestick to add oil to light. Tianyu checked the room of Hun Zi's mother-in-law again, knowing that this was the room of the dead, and he had new suspicions. Holding the pillar, he climbed up swiftly with his hands and feet, and sure enough, when adding oil, he saw 2 scratches on the beam. Like the second grandson, Hun Zi's mother-in-law was strangled to death and pretended to be hanged, with a day's interval in between. He lay down on the ground again, checking the corners that he might have missed. Adding oil found a pair of slippers from a visual blind spot. The uppers were patchwork of rags, and the soles were thick and thin. "What's wrong with these slippers?" Xiaomei asked carefully. Tianyu looked at the shoes, and the corner of his mouth was slightly hooked. "Do you remember that there is a guy in the player who walks high and low? That night watchman?" Xiaomei whispered. "Add oil to hide the shoes, a clue he won't leave to those 2 guys. They are both players and competitors. Although it is not completely certain, it can be used as a key suspect." On the other hand, the other 2 old players came out of the owner's room and the grandchildren's room, and they didn't seem to get any valid clues. They were hungry and sleepy, in poor physical condition and unable to concentrate. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law was panting with her heavy stomach. "Why is this thing so heavy? Is pregnancy so bad?" The pregnant belly greatly drags down the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law. This body also has problems such as swelling of the lower limbs, easy hunger, and sleepiness. Hunger and sleepiness lead to mental retardation, and she can't do anything about her current predicament. Chang Sun's performance wasn't much better either. He never thought that the biggest difficulty he encountered in this rookie game was food and sleep. The compression of the day has caused his spirit to be in a state of high tension, but he has no rest at all. The NPCs in this copy are very harsh on abnormal. No, it can be regarded as abuse. Tianyu came out with Xiaomei, and they walked straight towards the morning hall. On the way, they met the eldest grandson-in-law and eldest grandson who were resting their legs. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law was sitting on the ground to rest, and when she saw them, she frowned and asked, "Where are you going?" "Ming Tang, sleep." Tim gave her a look. "Sleep?" Tianyu reached out and rubbed the base of his nose. "Can you bear it without sleeping? Those NPCs don't give us a chance to rest at all." The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law was also silent. She even used her status as a pregnant woman to get some benefits for herself, but those NPCs were simply snake spirits, and she would be cursed even if she stole a little offering. "Is she pregnant?" "Pregnant woman." "Okay, what's the expression?" As long as the NPC finds something different, it's like this, in any game. Tianyu was too lazy to tell his eldest grandson-in-law, and walked to the morning hall. Xiaomei followed and walked in, and she found that the monk who had been sitting in the corner had shrunk to a further corner with his back to them. "Monk!" she called out, but there was no sound. Tianyu has already set up the cot with a stool, and sneered when he saw it, "Give it up, he's useless." Even the NPCs don't care about him anymore, which means that he has slowly merged with this dungeon. What will happen then? Xiaomei turned her head. It will become a part of this dungeon. With the dungeon's birth, with the dungeon's death, it will become an NPC. Tianyu shook his head. "In the future, you will get used to it when you see it a lot, and there will be this kind of guy every time." Seeing that he was already lying down and preparing to sleep, Xiaomei was sleepy with a splitting headache. She asked Timur with a wry smile, "Sir, if we don't eat, drink, and sleep like this, will we die suddenly?" Tianyu narrowed his eyes. "Dead? What do you think you are now?" You have been a dead person since you entered this game. Dead, dead. Xiaomei's eyes were round and round, like a reedied rabbit, but Tianyu had already closed her eyes and fell asleep, so she didn't dare to ask any more. This old player is more talkative than the other two, and it's super scary when annoyed. Fortunately, Xiaomei is a big heart, she thought about it. I think I am alive, so I closed my eyes against the pillar. Death is like that before insomnia. The courtyard was quiet, and the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law sat on the ground, leaning against the pillar and closing her eyes. She wanted to sleep with her knees and her head buried in her head. The dark environment was more reassuring. But her big belly prevented her from doing this. Players won't die because they don't eat, drink, or sleep, but they will die because of this. Only the eldest grandson didn't give up, he frowned and walked around in the various rooms. If you can't catch the ghost as soon as possible, you can only wait for the players to decrease one by one to increase the final accuracy. This is not a good way, the ghost will become more and more difficult to deal with. Chang Sun is upset, and he has lost control of the situation. There are many players who are collecting ghost cards like him, and the eldest daughter-in-law and Tianyu are also here. If this time is not successful, he is not sure whether he can find the next suitable copy within the specified time. Thinking of this, the eldest grandson player can hardly sit still. He stood up and wanted to fight again, but his body was like a dried salted fish, and he didn't obey orders. 1 foot light and 1 heavy foot, the eldest grandson player is so tired, like a traveler walking in the desert, his feet are as heavy as lead, his heart and lungs are burning and tingling, and he can fall down at any time. He passed by the bamboo shed and saw the night watchman lying next to him. This delicious NPC had a relaxed body and a peaceful sleeping face. He was still covered with a single layer of clothing, which made him feel at ease. All kinds of emotions came to my mind. It's good to be able to lie down and sleep. He kicked the bench hard. I don't know where he kicked, the benches side by side were shaking, and the outermost bench was tilted and fell directly to the ground. The NPC above was motionless, and the small half of the body was hanging in the air. The eldest grandson spat and went elsewhere. The author has something to say. A player kicked the NPC's bed, and he died. The moon is cold, the night is boundless, when will the bad players finish playing? NPC Ren Yifei kept his face relaxed and sleeping, with 1 hand and 1 foot hanging in the air. Fortunately, most of the body and the elbows and knees used as supports are covered, otherwise he is afraid that he will be cold. With so many NPCs, why would he bully him alone? He was lying down fine. Look at the weather, it's neither cold nor hot, neither wet nor dry. Look at this environment, the small bed set out by 3 long benches is covered with a coat, the straw shed is covered with the night dew, and a shadow is cast to cover it. Lying in it is not only safe, but when you look up, you can see the entire yard, including the most remote places, which is no better. He lay there, looking at the sky, the clouds, the moon, and the white dew on the ground as frost, with nowhere to put his active thoughts. Who would have thought that this crazy player would knock down a third of his bed with a kick from God? Insane, Fei remembered him. Dead man. Dead man. The sound of cleaning penetrated the mud wall, interrupting Ren Yifei's resentment. Dead? Who? Outside the morning hall, the sleeping and resting players all opened their eyes. Along with this voice, the information of the card changed, and the 8 survivors became 7 survivors. Tianyu stood up and sat up, fingers irritably scratching his hair, with a dark face. Go. Xiaomei kept up without a word, and the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law and eldest grandson also set off one after the other. Several players arrived at the place where the cleaning was at the fastest speed, which was the backyard. The door to the woodshed was open, and a player burned to death. He died a few minutes ago, but the body was already charcoal. Stop screaming, tell me what you see. The grandson scolded the cleaning impatiently. The cleaning was still in shock, and when he saw the fierce eldest grandson, he trembled even more. And he came to the backyard and said, "Yes, let's check one by one." He speaks intermittently, losing logic because of fear, but everyone understands it. Cleaning and Asong came to the backyard to find clues, and they were alone. After cleaning and searching, I didn't see Asong for a long time, so I went to find him. After searching for a while, he felt that the firewood house was a little weird, so he opened the firewood house. However, as soon as the woodshed was opened, the man lying on the dry wood burned wildly, and within a few minutes the man became coke. "He's still alive." Sweeping trembled and kept repeating, "When I opened the door, he was still alive." The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law looked at him and shook her head. "Tisk, another one." Another one collapsed unbearably. The tragic situation of the newcomer seemed to make her feel better. When she was unlucky, others were even more unlucky. Tianyu walked over, covered his nose and checked it out. The corpse's eyes are wide, its mouth is black, and its expression is distorted. His hair has turned into powder, his skin has been completely charred, and there are still traces of hemp rope and clothes on his body, which was previously tied up. It's even harder to deal with a boss who has been burned alive, and some of the seals have been lifted. Tianyu sighed and looked down to find a card. He took this card away, and the golden inscription "Night Watchman" on the corpse's head disappeared. "It's useless, let's go." Tianyu and Xiaomei left the backyard first. Tianyu walked quickly, and Xiaomei ran a few steps before catching up. "Sir, that person is..." "I know, the limping guy." After adding oil, he stopped, his expression solemn. "There is another trouble, the ninth person who disappeared." "What?" Xiaomei didn't hear clearly. But add oil no longer answer. It didn't take long for the eldest grandson's daughter-in-law, the eldest grandson, and the soulless cleaning to come to the morning hall. A new victim appeared, the knife on the head a little closer. 2 nights are about to pass, and they don't have any clues? Even old players feel bad. The flame of the ever-bright lamp jumped, and the warm light enveloped them, but the body was cold, just like their mood at the moment. "Let's talk." Tianyu pulled out a stool and sat down. Xiaomei especially has the potential of dog legs. She immediately ran to stand behind Tianyu, and even touched a handful of peanuts and brought them up. "If you can't sleep, it's better to sit down and talk." The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law and the eldest grandson each found a seat and sat down. Sweeping lost his energy, and he couldn't accept it for a while watching the live player die in front of him. As for the monk in the corner, it has been abolished, and no one counts his share. The second night is about to pass, and we still have nothing to gain. Tim said with a smile, "A novice game, 3 old players, but it seems unreasonable to play like this." The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law turned her face away, scratching her hair irritably. The eldest grandson looked at Tianyu. "You seem to have a clue." "Yes," Tianyu laughed, "it's a pity it's broken." "What's the clue?" Zhang Sun asked. Tianyu glanced at him and said in a low voice, "I found 2 rubbing marks on the beams in Grandma Hunzi's room, as well as a pair of shoes with different thicknesses of solace." "The friction marks of the 2 beams? Who else hanged?" The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law raised her head with an eager expression. "Mother-in-law Hunzi and the second grandson die in the same way? First strangled, and then disguised as hanging." She contacted the previous clues, the clues that pushed the death time. The real time of death and the time of death may be 1 day apart. Her family's hand. That's right. I also suspect that the behavior of the family members of the deceased is panic, fear, and guilt. If it was a normal death, or if they were killed by others, they should not behave in this way. Added you. Grandma Hunzi has long and short legs. I already had a suspect. You all know that the player is only wearing the skin, and the core is still her own, so the role she plays must be inappropriate. But Tianyu remembered that he had burned the dead night watchman, silently swallowed his unwillingness. This is the case, and we can only continue to look forward. The eldest grandson and his daughter-in-law both thought of the limping player. But the people are gone. This is actually a novice game. Wife's son felt that she was being fooled. Is this difficult novice game planning to destroy the newcomers? I think the breakthrough point lies in the ninth person. Tianyu's eyes slowly slid over the NPC. I suspect that person is hidden in the NPC. The ghost's familiarity with dungeons is unmatched by us. It has this ability. Sir, what kind of existence is a ghost? Xiaomei asked in a low voice. The copy is established based on the memory of the ghost, and this is its home ground. Xiaomei immediately understood, so you guessed that the ninth person is a ghost, disguised as an NPC? That's too cheap. How do you find it? There are restrictions. This time it was the eldest grandson who spoke. The NPCs in the dungeon have their own activity mode, and the dungeon is also derived, and they are not exactly the same as the ghost memory. In addition, no matter how many times the ghost enters the dungeon, its memory will always be the first time. Only after clearing the customs, I will remember the countless repeated copies of what I have experienced. Time suspension is a novice benefit, maybe we can use it to find the ninth person. The eldest grandson's daughter-in-law's eyes lit up. Are you checking these NPCs? Xiaomei asked him. Oil nodded and shook his head, check NPCs, but don't use harmful methods. For the sake of Xiaomei's liking, Tianyu decided to say a few more words. Ghost can't kill NPCs. Once the ghost finds the wrong hunting target and kills NPCs, the game will stop immediately. Players are slightly better, but killing NPCs will lead to a decrease in overall NPC favorability, an increase in game difficulty, and even game failure. Chang Sun suddenly remembered that he had just kicked an NPC sped. This shouldn't be considered harmful, right? He touched his forehead and changed the subject. The second night is about to pass. Tomorrow, I will thoroughly investigate the morning hall and house, check every NPC, and find the ninth person. Everyone looked at each other and nodded silently. Okay. When the ugly time comes, NPCs recover. It's very amazing. The world that presses the pause button opens again. Ren Yifei sits up and stretches. Hey? Why did the stool fall down? Aja, what's the order? Haven't you heard the sound of the watch? It's ugly time. As an NPC player, he didn't feel weird at all. Ren Yifei yawned, and the players in the morning hall looked different. He vaguely heard a lot of the players' conversation before, but the voice was too low and the information was a little vague. But it is certain that this group of people wanted to find him, and the carpet search was on the third night. I'm in trouble. He already knew the cause of Hun Zi's mother-in-law's death and who the murderer was. But what about the murderer's motive? A quarter of an hour later, a loud scream broke through the sky, and he knew that the body had been found. This time it was the kitchen lady who found the charred body. She was going to go to the backyard to get some firewood. The crowd gathered again, and they recognized them for a long time, but they couldn't recognize them, so they signed up one by one, and a song stood out. Could it be that he owes a gambling debt to some enemy? The night watchmen were discussing. I knew that he was so good at gambling, there must be one day. Good bet? The look that Asong looked at the game was not the look a gambler should have. There were too many doubts in this man. He was limping while walking, but he died. Like other players, Ren Yifei doubted Asong. Because all doubts and clues point to him. But other players still have a confusing option of the ninth person. Ren Yifei himself is the ninth person, he has no choice. How could death be? Ren Yifei always felt suspicious, so he made an excuse to go to the backyard. The corpse has disappeared. Like the second grandson, the existence of Asong has been erased, and no one knows that this person has come. He looked in the woodshed for a while, but found nothing. The ghost didn't know how to do it, the corpses were all turned into coke, and the firewood in the firewood house had nothing to do with it. Ren Yifei got out of the firewood room and was about to leave. Why did that rose wilt? Under the banana tree, a listless rose caught his attention. Is it a pest disease? He was also bored and went up to take a look. At a glance, the problem was seen. The color of the soil is not right, and it looks like this trace has been turned over in the past 2 days. Dead people, still have the mind to plant flowers? Ren Yifei looked up and saw that there was no one there. He brought a shovel from the woodshed, then inserted the shovel into the soil, and stepped on it with his foot. Sure enough, he had dug not long ago, and it was very soft. The moon was dark and the wind was high. He looked up again, looked left and right, and looked back again. No one around, good time. Not long after digging up the rose, the shovel came across something odd. Ren Yifei was about to take a closer look when he suddenly heard footsteps. He immediately straightened the rose, took the soil and pressed the roots a little, then took the shovel and stepped into the banana tree and retracted. He was thin, squatted there carefully, and the darkness covered him, so he couldn't see. The sound of footsteps came from far to near, and stopped not far in front of the banana tree. The author has something to say. Ghost, guess who I am?